Before we get into tonight's story, I want to start with something almost embarrassingly ordinary. Picture a kid, 8 or 9 years old, lying on his back in a backyard at dusk, staring up at the sky, trying to find a shape in the clouds before they drift apart. Almost everyone has done this. It's one of the most harmless things a human being can do with their imagination, looking up, looking for a pattern, and usually finding nothing more than a cloud that sort of looks like a dog. I'm bringing this up because somewhere over Iran this past April, an American fighter pilot looked up at the sky in the middle of the worst moment of his professional life, and he also thought he saw a shape, except what he says he saw wasn't a cloud. And nobody in the United States government has been able to agree, even now, on whether to believe him. Stick with me, because this story isn't really about drones. It's about what happens when the most powerful military on Earth gets a piece of information it doesn't want to be true, right at the exact moment its president is trying to close the book on a war. Here's what we actually know, and I want to be precise about this, because the moment you start rounding the details up for drama, you've stopped doing journalism and started doing theater. In April, during the early phase of what the Pentagon was calling Operation Epic Fury, a U.S. Air Force F-15 was shot down over Iranian territory. This was, according to multiple reports, the first time Iran had downed a U.S. fighter jet during that war. The aircraft carried 2 crew members, a pilot and a weapons systems officer, both ejected. The pilot was recovered by U.S. Special Forces within hours. The weapons systems officer wasn't as lucky. He spent more than a day evading capture in the mountains before a rescue team got him out. Both men survived. That part of the story is, by any measure, a success. 2 Americans went down in hostile territory and both came home. Hold on to that, because it matters later when we talk about what this story is actually being used for in Washington right now. During the standard intelligence debriefing that follows any combat loss like this, the pilot described something that, according to CNN's reporting, which cited 4 separate sources familiar with the matter, immediately set off what one source called a firestorm inside the intelligence community. He said that in the moments before his jet went down, he saw multiple Iranian drones in the air, not flying independently, but moving together as one coordinated body. Witnesses who heard his account described the shape as resembling a jellyfish, a central cluster of larger drones with smaller drones positioned beneath them, like legs trailing under a body. One source put it more bluntly than any Pentagon press release ever would. Quote, "Real alien stuff." A second source told CNN the pilot described it differently, but just as unsettling. Not a formation, but what he called a minefield of drones simply hanging in the air around him. Now here's the long-short rhythm of why this matters, because the details aren't just colorful, they're technical. What the pilot may have witnessed has an actual name in defense circles: one-to-many meshed networking. In plain language, that means a single operator commanding a whole cluster of drones simultaneously, with the drones themselves communicating with each other in real time to hold a formation, redistribute roles, or react as a unit rather than as individual machines being flown one at a time. Russia and China are believed to have this capability. Iran, as of the most recent assessments before this incident, was not believed to. That's the entire crux of the intelligence community's discomfort, not the spectacle, the capability gap. A short sentence because this is where the story stops being about Iran and starts being about us. If true, the United States missed it. And that's exactly why intelligence officials split into 2 camps almost immediately. One camp takes the pilot's account seriously, precisely because of how specific it was. Interconnected drones, smaller units underneath the larger ones, a coordinated shape rather than a cluster of separate aircraft happening to be near each other. That's not the kind of detail people typically invent under stress. The other camp points to something just as real. The pilot had been concussed in the crash. And this was not his first time being shot out of the sky during this war. 2 of CNN's sources said he had also been among the crew downed earlier in a friendly fire incident involving Kuwaiti forces. So, the debrief, according to one source, reportedly included intelligence officers asking him directly, "Are you sure you saw what you're saying? You saw. That's not an accusation. That's the job." But it tells you that even the people whose entire career is evaluating battlefield intelligence couldn't resolve this one on the spot. Let's slow down here, because this is the kind of moment a script like this usually rushes past. And rushing past it is exactly how you miss the point. A drone defense expert who spoke to CNN, Emma Bates, laid out what's actually at stake if the account is accurate. If a drone swarm can hold a recognizable shape, coordinate as a unit, carry explosives, and hold some of its drones in reserve to strike whatever survives the first wave, that's not a swarm anymore. That's a weapons system. And weapon systems like that are expensive to defend against in a very specific, very American way. The United States and its allies have spent years building extraordinarily sophisticated, extraordinarily expensive interceptor systems designed to shoot down expensive threats. Ballistic missiles, manned aircraft, large munitions. A meshed, coordinated drone swarm flips that math upside down. You end up using $1 million interceptor to take down a machine that might have cost a few $100s to build. Multiply that exchange rate across a sustained conflict, and you don't need to win a single battle to win the war of attrition. You just need the other side to run out of money and missiles before you run out of drones. That's the part of this story that should actually keep people in Washington up at night, far more than the jellyfish detail itself. Whether or not Iran already had this exact capability in April is, in a sense, beside the point. What this incident did is force a question into the open that the United States has been able to avoid asking directly for years. What happens when a country with a fraction of America's defense budget builds the kind of coordinated drone capability that, until recently, only Russia and China were believed to have? And there's a trail of reporting, again, according to sources familiar with the matter, suggesting Iran may have received exactly that kind of technical assistance from both of those countries. If accurate, that's not a story about Iran's ingenuity. That's a story about America's two most serious strategic rivals quietly arming a third country with a capability specifically designed to be expensive for the United States to counter. Here's where I want to bring in the part of this story that gets buried under all the talk of jellyfish formations and alien technology, because it's the part that actually determines what happens next. This incident did not happen in a vacuum. It happened in April, in the middle of a war between the United States, Israel, and Iran that began in late February and didn't formally wind down until this month, June, when President Trump signed a memorandum of understanding with Iran's government to end the hostilities and reopen the Strait of Hormuz. Trump announced the agreement on social media with characteristic flourish. Ships of the world, start your engines, let the oil flow. Global markets responded almost instantly. Oil prices dropped, and the administration treated it publicly as a clean strategic win. A war that started under his watch, ended under his watch, on terms he negotiated. But sit with the timeline for a second, because this is the part of the story that doesn't get said out loud in any press conference. The same month, American intelligence officials were quietly trying to figure out whether Iran has a drone capability nobody thought it had. The President of the United States was signing a deal to formally end hostilities with that same country. A deal that, by his own admission, settles almost nothing about Iran's underlying military and nuclear capabilities, and instead opens a 60-day window to negotiate those harder questions later. Vice President J.D. Vance was sent to finalize details in Switzerland. The signing location reportedly shifted. The trip was delayed without a clear public explanation. And even after the deal was signed, Trump himself undercut its permanence at a G7 appearance, saying, in effect, that if Iran doesn't behave, the bombing resumes immediately. That is not the language of a closed chapter. That's the language of a pause button. So here's the actual tension at the center of this story, and it's a very American one. A sitting president who built part of his political identity on ending wars decisively just signed a deal to end one. While quietly, several floors below the press conference podium, his own intelligence community is trying to figure out whether the country he just made peace with has a drone capability advanced enough to make every existing U.S. air defense doctrine in the region partially obsolete. Those two facts are happening at the same time, inside the same administration, and almost nobody is being asked to reconcile them in public. What does this actually mean for the United States going forward, beyond one pilot's account and one signed memorandum? A few things, and none of them are speculative. They're already visible in how the Pentagon and Congress are behaving. First, Expect a quiet, unglamorous increase in funding requests for counter-drone systems and electronic warfare capable of disrupting meshed networks rather than shooting down individual aircraft one at a time. Because the old math of expensive interceptor versus cheap drone doesn't survive contact with a coordinated swarm. Second, expect continued friction inside Trump's own party over the Iran deal itself. Some Republicans have already criticized the memorandum as a costly concession that does too little to actually restrict Iran's weapons programs, even as others, like Senator Roger Marshall, have publicly defended it as an improvement over the 2015 nuclear agreement Trump withdrew from during his first term. Third, and this is the one nobody wants to say plainly, if the pilot's account holds up under further investigation, the United States will have learned about a significant adversary capability, not through years of careful intelligence gathering, but by accident, from a concussed pilot ejecting from a burning aircraft. That is not how a superpower wants to discover what its rivals can do. None of this means the sky is falling, and I'd be doing exactly what I criticized at the start of this video if I tried to convince you it does. It's entirely possible the pilot, disoriented and injured, misread a far more mundane formation of drones as something more sinister than it was. Intelligence officials inside his own debrief raised that exact possibility, and they're not wrong to. But it's also possible he saw exactly what he says he saw, and that the technology gap the United States has spent the last decade assuming it controlled has narrowed faster, and more quietly, than anyone in Washington has been willing to admit out loud. Especially in the same month, a peace deal needed a clean, simple story to sell to the American public. Whichever version turns out to be true, one fact won't change. The United States ended this war on a presidential announcement, a social media post, and a ceremonial signature. The deeper question, what Iran can now actually do in the air, and who helped them learn how to do it, wasn't settled by that signature at all. It was just handed a 60-day pause and a label that says, "The hard part is over." That's FEN for Borderlines. Analysis from the edge. If you think this kind of detail is worth having, the channel's just getting started.